You all are going to get the chance to hear again from Brandon Green, who's going to come join us on the stage. You're going to get to hear from Lawrence Cox, who's going to come join us on the stage. Another Cox, no relation, that's unfortunate.
That's my sister.
We also have Nicole McCarty, who is going to come and join us on the stage. Joshua Mize is also going to come and join us on the stage. And then joining us remotely is Cameron Clark. I'm not sure why I named up there, but listen, each of these great people is going to introduce themselves, so I'm not going to take the time to do that. And then I am going to get into questions. Does that make sense for everybody?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm tired, but I'm glad to see y'all faces. My name is Lawrence Cox. Of course, I'm the Regional Advocacy and Organizing Associate for LSPC and All of Us at None. Yeah, and I'm here.
Thank you. So brief.
Good morning.
Oh, is this on? Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's past noon. My name is Nicole Carty. I live in Brooklyn, New York, but I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia, so bringing some Southern energy here. And I am the executive director of Get Free, which is a youth-led movement to repair past harms, remove ongoing barriers to equality, and create a future where freedom is for all. We organize young people to create political and public support for reparations in order to pass reparations legislation. And I'm excited to be here with you all today. I won't take up more time than that, but eager to get into this conversation.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joshua Mize. Raj Josh Kai, Higa Rajani Wina, Hijakishina, Hidikari Wina. Raj Josh Kai, Higa Nina, Hadichari Yapi. I just introduced myself in my Ho-Chunk language. I'm a Ho-Chunk Menominee on my mom's side, and Osage Quapa on my father's side. And I am the community organizer and program coordinator for Returning Relatives Department of Indigenous Justice, led by Morningstar Raleigh. It's a good day to be here. It's a good day to be Indigenous. So,
And then Cameron, can I invite you to introduce yourself?
Is it my turn?
Yes, please.
We're just doing quick introductions. Hi, folks. My name is Cameron Clark. You see him, they, them pronouns. I'm a supervising attorney and a lecturer at UC Berkeley. I work within the Policy Advocacy Clinic. We bring together law students and public policy students to work together on state and local legislative projects, including some projects in the Bay Area relating to reproductive justice. And so really excited to be there virtually, and sorry that I'm unable to attend in person. I'm actually at a clinical lawyer conference right now in Portland. And I am happy to report that reparations are front and center at this event. It was actually a part of the keynote address here as well. And so, excited to see that these are issues that are getting attention, and happy to talk about ways that we can do more of that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to each of our panelists. One of the things I want to do in terms of grounding us and framing us is to name that, notwithstanding the fact that Proposition 6 failed November 2024, it still hurts my heart to say that, we absolutely intend to run it back. And one of the things that we have come to appreciate is that Ending slavery in California absolutely has to be talked about and discussed as part of our reparations work. Because I'm sure we would all agree that you cannot repair the harm until you stop causing the harm in the first place. So very, very excited to be having this conversation today, where we intend to marry these conversations. So I'm gonna start off, I sincerely appreciate the folks who put all of the work into bringing this panel together today. And so I'm gonna honor that work by staying true to what they have established. So our first set of discussion is gonna be around what was taken and what is owed. Our first question is to Brandon. Can you, in legal terms, not just moral terms, name for us what exactly was taken? What was taken and what is owed?
So, I will name that the moral case is a lot easier than the legal one. In part because, as you all are aware, the 13th Amendment continues to include an exception to involuntary servitude as it relates to punishment for a crime. And so, as a result, all of the things that we would discuss as it relates to losses legally, not morally, end up sort of being subsumed into that exception. So we'll talk about this more with some of the other questions, but things around labor laws, things around fair compensation, things around minimum wage, all of those various things that all of us would be entitled to protections for don't really exist on the criminal side of things. Where it gets somewhat interesting is on the civil side. So we all are aware that we are experiencing a variety of ICE and immigration crackdowns. We're experiencing expansions of private prison industry, which sees the ICE crackdowns as a gold mine. They're continuing to build and expand even as we have movements to be closing prisons. And because immigration is seen as distinct, immigration detention rather seen as distinct from punishment for a crime, it is open to avenues of civil litigation for things that you can't now get for litigation on the criminal side. So things like unjust enrichment, when people are being held or detained in immigration facility and being forced to work to be able to make a phone call, or work to be able to send an email, or work for their commissary. All of those things end up being able to be combated and litigated under fair wage laws, under unjust enrichment, and under coercion in a way that you cannot currently pursue on the criminal side. Which is why, to Carmen's point, it's imperative that we remove the exception clause so that there can be the avenues for advocacy, litigation, change, and restoration that don't currently exist.
Thank you for that, Brandon, and I think it's a great segue. You referenced unjust enrichment. So Cameron, I'm gonna come to you. What would you say is sort of the cleanest way to explain unjust enrichment to a non-lawyer?
Yeah, thanks for teeing that up. Unjust enrichment, I think, is really based in kind of the basic principles that we all can appreciate around harm and repair, right? We have common law, which is kind of the ways that the courts, for example, the Supreme Court creates law out of whole cloth. That's how we have, this kind of ending of the Voting Rights Act that we've been kind of lamenting over the last week, right? And then we have statutory law where the legislature, whether it be at the state, the local, the federal level, creates law and kind of codifies it. And so unjust enrichment was a common law principle that has long existed before, Congress was around, before state legislatures were enacting laws, that stood for the principle that if you receive some type of benefit that is on the backs of or at the harm of some other person, you need to give up that benefit, right? It was ultimately how, Belinda Sutton, that first enslaved woman who was able to obtain, restitution, to receive reparations out of the estate of her, former slaver after he fled the country. It was how she was able to convince the Massachusetts court that she deserved those reparations. It wasn't because she was seen as a human that, was able to bring claims under contract or claims under tort law. It was because she could make a claim to this very basic principle that her labors were what led to the wealth that was generated by Isaac Burrell, and that to see her not receive any of that, to see her, ailing daughter unable to receive medical care or treatment because she didn't have any of the wealth produced from her labors, was simply unjust, and that was not a system of law that we wanted to see. And so unjust enrichment kind of exists in that theoretical space even today, right? But what we've seen is that there's been a lot of statutory reforms at the state level, for example, that have really foreclosed these opportunities to be able to utilize it. And that's really one of the reasons why you're seeing that a lot of reparative justice work is in kind of the legislative space, right? You're not seeing folks being able to bring those kind of private lawsuits against, for example, private actors, because the courts have really foreclosed that and the legislatures have foreclosed that as well. There was a really famous case a few years ago at this point in Illinois that was looking at trying to sue the insurance companies that insured boats that carried enslaved people across the oceans, right? And the courts ultimately rejected that lawsuit for a number of reasons, but one being that they said it was too big of an issue for the courts to be able to resolve on their own. They had to have the legislature step in, right? And so again, that's just one of those concrete ways where the opportunities we have to be able to move forward reparative claims are being foreclosed right in front of our eyes. And so, as part of my kind of academic work and also, in working with, reparative justice groups in the Bay Area, it's been really exciting to try to create opportunities to move that forward as part of reparations. So it's not just about being able to seek, financial compensation directly from the state or the local or the federal government, but it's also about allowing through the federal or the state government those claims that can be brought against private actors for the unjust riches that they are being able to receive. Brandon brought up this example of immigration detention. There's tons of people, I'm from Texas, there's tons of people who have been getting shipped around the country, being shipped out of the country on commercial charter flights, getting bussed around the country, against their will. And those organizations are receiving benefits, they're getting paid by the federal government, they're under contract. And so how are there ways that we can also hold them accountable, in addition to state and federal governments, for the harms that they're moving forward?
Thank you so much for that, Cameron. And I can tell you're a pro at this because you immediately went to mute. Bless you, my brother. Okay. My next question is actually for Lawrence. It's tough to hear Brandon and Cameron with their legal lens talk about what's not, how unjust enrichment right now isn't available for us. We want to hear from your perspective, what would the repair require in the first place, right? When we're talking about unjust enrichment, what exactly did the system take based on your lived experience, and what would repair look like?
That's a real deep question. We can unfold that. I can unfold it in many layers. First, I could say was taken from me was my community. Was an equal opportunity to grow up with a family that had the ability to rear me and take care of me, have access to wealth and property, had access to an effective education system that could have really had a different trajectory on my life, and we can start there. Because we all know that, some of the degradation that we see in our communities, we already know that inevitably it's attached to the consequences that we are still seeing and experiencing from the system that's set up and tries and continues to sustain what we call, well, slavery is what we call it, but now it's involuntary servitude, if we're sticking with the legal lens. But also, the consequences therein, creates an environment where not only are these communities that are disenfranchised existing, they're also being an intentional target to funnel mass incarceration, to funnel a different system in a different name that still does the same thing and causes harm. And it greatly profits off the harm of other individuals. And of course, I've been subjected to that myself. We have a term, we call ourselves retired slaves. And a lot of people may laugh or smirk at that and don't understand it because either they're undereducated or they really haven't looked at it with the perspective of what's really going on, what our history is, and who we are and what we have endured. And we've been subjected to a system that exploits us for our labor and uses the legal cover that I committed a crime to justify that. So of course, it's an incentive to make sure that me and people that look like me get 3 times the sentence as someone who does not look like me, for the same crime. And being subjected to that means that, guess what? I'm going to go to prison if I do what someone else does that doesn't look like me. I'm going to use at least twice as much of my life, my ability to be with my loved ones and my family, to build, but also I'm going to be at least 2 times more, spending 2 times more time of giving labor that's going to bring value to someone else out of my harm. And just to be succinct and short, I think that says enough. I think that says it all, because there are so many layers as you unfold it. There's so much loss. There's so much value being gained through that loss. And if you just take me and you multiply that by the pure number that's happened, you can really see the sustainable harm.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I do appreciate you being succinct. I want to take this next question to Nicole. You shared that your work is with young folks. Where would you say young people are already paying the price of this unrepaired harm?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, I feel like we've been talking about it up here the whole time, right? In incarceration, in their health, in their schooling. None of these systems have actually been thoroughly interrupted. We're still facing the consequences in our communities, and until we actually do repair this harm, we're gonna face the consequences in these communities, in our communities, and in the country. At Get Free, one thing that we really like to frame reparations as, I think that we have to say, is like reparations are for the future, right? So often when we talk about repair and harm, we think about repairing something that happened a long time ago or doing justice for our ancestors, and that is real, that's true, but it's not just this, because every subsequent generation, all of our lifetimes, are still dealing with these consequences. And what's valuable about phrasing it in that way is when you phrase it as, well, someone long ago did this thing, just people who aren't even alive anymore, it's really easy for especially our opposition to justify why this isn't necessary and why you should just put it down and not actually try to achieve repair. But framing it as something, and clearly something that's still happening, that's ongoing, it makes every single person who is alive, who is in power, who is in this country today complicit with not stopping it, right? And so we need to kind of take the onus and the language out of understanding reparations as something that is even like rooted in 40 acres and a mule and something a long time ago, but understand that it is sociologically the only thing, like comprehensive reparations, which again is beyond just money, right? Comprehensive reparations is restitution, making equal rights. It is returning wealth, the money, that is an important part of reparations. It's telling the whole history, which we're seeing so blatantly attacked in this moment. Why? So we can justify a white supremacist future. It's actually healing, rehabilitating our communities, right? Giving them support to actually rectify for themselves the harm that white supremacy has done. And most importantly, it's stopping and rewriting the rules so that these harms don't happen again. We haven't done that, and actually we're rolling back the clock on what has actually succeeded to undo that. And all of those things, all of those processes are part of comprehensive reparations, and it's on all of us. Like, there are children who will be dying, there are people who will be suffering, there are communities that will be hurt, traumatized, right, if we don't actually repair this harm in the future. And we can stop it right now, today, if we seriously reckon with the ongoing legacies of these harms. So, I mean, Brandon talked at length about, you know, how this is showing up in our schooling, how it's showing up in our health, the ways that the lack of repair is impacting us are present in every single waking moment of all of our lives. And the question is what's going to make it urgent to actually address from the foundation?
Yeah, I appreciate that. For those of you who aren't 100% familiar, you know, on Wednesday of last week, your United States Supreme Court said that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is which was written to ensure that governments cannot use race in order to discriminate. It was actually written because all of these government agencies were discriminating specifically against Black folks to keep them from voting, to keep them from registering to vote. Last Wednesday, the court struck down and basically neutered Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act that allowed us to bring challenges to say that the result of this map that was drawn or this procedure that was put in place will actually dilute the Black vote or the Latino vote or the Asian American vote. So it's interesting to hear you all talking about needing repair, and it really frames and sort of crystallizes what you're saying, Nicole, about how we really should be talking about repair as future looking, because unless and until we teach truth and we lay this groundwork for the future, we're literally going to keep going backwards. We literally now have to go back to the Civil Rights Movement. It took Bloody Sunday for us to get Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Thousands of people were lynched for us to get Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And so I really appreciate you framing it as something that should be forward-looking, so that it does make folks accountable right now, today, for their action or inaction. That was not in the script, so I'm gonna get back on script. In the script, though, is a question for Joshua. Joshua, can you offer us a principle framework for what repair requires when the harm is both historical, as we've heard, and continuing? For example, Wednesday's decision last week. What's required? It's before and it's now.
Thank you, that was a good transition. Repair must begin with the truth, first of all. We need to be, express our truths and continue that. And the second is land and our self-determination. For indigenous justice, repair cannot be symbolic or one size fits all. Historical harm remains active through land dispossession, criminalization, family separation, extraction, and state violence. Real repair requires honoring those distinct histories, sovereignty, and leadership of each impacted community, including tribal nations, Black communities, immigrant communities, and other communities targeted by colonial and carceral systems. Because different histories require distinct pathways, we must have a shared commitment to self-determination. Accountable repair recognizes that indigenous genocide, anti-Black enslavement, and other forms of racialized violence are not interchangeable. Solidarity must be grounded in specificality, while aligning around the right of all communities to define their own solutions Repair must center families, kinship, and cultural continuity. Policies and funding should prioritize keeping families together. Let me put that again. Families and funding should prioritize keeping families together, supporting cultural practices, and restoring intergenerational knowledge systems that were intentionally disrupted. Funding must shift from systems of harm to systems of care. Budgets reflect values. Continuing to fund policing, incarceration, and surveillance while underfunding prevention, healing, and community-led safety perpetuates harm. How many of you guys know what CDCR's budget is for 2026?
Too much.
It is too much. $14.6 billion. Can you imagine if that money was community-led? How far we could go with that? And you know, handling our own disputes and everything. We will do a lot with that. And thank you for that question.
Yeah, no. Absolutely, thank you. And also, thank you for naming so eloquently something that is sometimes difficult to say. There is something different about what reparations means for Black folks as compared to Native American folks, as compared to Latino folks, right? Like, and it's okay, because as you said, we can still stand in, and we should still stand in solidarity with each other, because all of us, right? With that, y'all, we're actually gonna move to our second block of conversation. And in this conversation, we're gonna talk about coercion in plain sight, involuntary servitude today. The first thing we're gonna say about involuntary servitude today is end it. End slavery, no exceptions. But back on script, Lawrence, where does compulsion show up with respect to involuntary servitude? What exactly does that look like inside?
My bad, I was trying to get Manny attention, who was falling asleep, so he could get my charger so the laptop wouldn't fall. That wasn't in the script either. But I do believe the question that was posed to me.
You want me to get it back to you?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No problem. Where does compulsion show up inside? What does it look like?
Okay. Might be surprised. It shows up in punishing an individual who desires to get their collegiate degree instead of deciding that they want to be slaved in a hot kitchen for pennies or nothing. And then dismissing the fact that the punishment was because I broke a rule, not because I wanted to rehabilitate myself. The compulsion shows up in when I want to go to the parole board to get released, despite me being rehabilitated, despite me having understanding of my crime, despite me having remorse, despite me being a leader and truly changing. Guess what? The fact that I chose not to be forced to work where I didn't receive no material gain, all because I wanted to get my degree, was looked at as I can't follow directions. So if you can't follow directions here, you can't follow directions on the street. So you see where I'm going with this, right? Compulsion can look so like different and just depend on, you know, the circumstance and the individual. And I just use those simple ones because I've experienced those myself. I've experienced them in different ways to where, you know, if I didn't like what was going on in the environment, and I'm not going to work there, I'm being defiant. And of course, that defiance means you get a write-up. If I don't want to work, I don't have my autonomy not to. I'm going to get a write-up. Each write-up comes with points. And when you get points added on, you get too many points, you go to upper levels. The higher the level, guess what? The more violence we endure. The greater the opportunity that you find yourself committing a crime off of self-defense or doing something else that gets you more time. And so it's a perpetuating cycle, and it can show up in so many harmful ways that is totally counterproductive to rehabilitation. And those were just to name a few.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to offer that we are currently, and myself included, we are in this time where we're lifting up incarcerated firefighters. And as we should be, because we are saying that their heroic activities in saving lives and property while inside should be valued once they come out. But some might say that another form of compulsion looks like you have to work no matter what. And so you will take the job that pays you or that you think gives you the most benefit. So while we hear folks in the legislature and on the news and in other places talking about incarcerated firefighters and how this is completely voluntary, well, the reality is, since you have to work somewhere, the fact that you choose a dangerous job that's going to get you more time off your sentence and get you outside of the cage, maybe that actually isn't voluntary. Maybe that is another way that compulsion shows up. So, maybe. Let me go back to the script. So the script says, Brandon, what is the clearest legal line, to the extent that you can draw one, that distinguishes work from coerced labor when you're incarcerated?
Yeah, so kind of piggybacking off my previous comment, I think the clearest line that can be drawn is, again, in this sort of immigration, civil containment context, in part because in those spaces, because someone has not been convicted of a crime, the exception in the 13th Amendment does not necessarily apply. That is the argument. And so when somebody in those spaces and or in a state that has now removed the involuntary servitude except clause, then when somebody is told to do work that they don't want to do and they refuse, and they are punished either with solitary confinement or in numerous other ways, then that is the clearest line of coercion, because in those instances, there's not the exception to fall back on. To your earlier statement and my statement, the reason why it is so important to strike that language is because striking that language changes other things. So right now, if we're talking about the state of California, if you are told to do work and you don't do that work and then you are punished, to Lawrence's point, you're seen as defiant, you're seen as not following the rules, you're seen as all of these things that fit within that sort of current paradigm. Interestingly enough, there's a couple of different law review articles that were written recently by a professor at the University of Chicago, where he talks about this idea that what we're really talking about is administrative slavery, because what happens in sentencing is not that somebody is being told you're being sentenced to 5 to 7 years of labor, you're being sentenced to 10 to 20 years of labor, you're being told you're being sentenced to X amount of time of incarceration. Not that that incarceration, as part of that sentence and part of that punishment, comes with your labor. And so it's a known unknown. It's an unspoken thing that is not declared at the time that you are before the judge. And there's not been a lot that has been I think, interrogated around that, definitely not from a legal framework. Like, is there any legal distinction or significance to the fact that when you were standing up there receiving your sentence, you're not being told that for the time that you will be incarcerated, that you will have to give your labor, as it was in the South, maybe, like you're being sentenced to 20 years of hard labor, or like in the movie Life, right? Where they were told that they were going to be serving their time on this plantation and chain gang and all those kinds of things. And so that is the clearest distinction right now, whether it's in one of those places that has removed the exception, or in the instances of these sort of private immigration detainment centers, because, as I noted earlier, being held in the immigration detainment center is not the same as being convicted of a crime and then sentenced to serve that sentence in another place. And so, unfortunately, much of those distinctions don't appear accessible until you have removed that language and made that constitutional amendment.
Yeah, thank you for that. As you were talking, a couple of things came up for me. One, how convenient that the judge who's sitting in open court now gets to say, it's not me who sentenced you to forced labor. I never said that, right? It's the same playbook as now calling it involuntary servitude. We're whitewashing it. We are trying to make it look and feel and sound like something different. Where we're like, well, our court systems would never. Anyway, just a thought. The other thing that occurs to me is when we were moving the legislation through the legislature to get Prop 6 on your November 2024 ballot, a couple of things came up around work. One was we were trying to make sure that in the language we constructed, that CDCR would not be able to shoehorn things that actually look like work into rehabilitation. So for example, there are occasions where folks do vocational training, where they develop vocations, and that vocation might be repairing the correctional officers' cars. And then the question becomes, well, now hold on now. That's worth something, it's valuable. If I didn't do it for free, you have to pay somebody for it. It requires talent and some human labor. So is that in fact work? And sorry, so that just came up for me when you were talking. It's like, there are these question marks around what exactly is work that we really are going to have to dig into at some point, because as we know, white supremacy rarely goes away quietly. It just adapts. And so even once we get language that says you cannot coerce people to work, we gotta be concerned about whether the oppressors, the colonizers, the white supremacists are gonna try to shoehorn things and call them education or vocation rather than work. That too is not on the script. Joshua, you are on the script.
Just real.
Oh yeah, thank you.
And the last thing I would say, which I feel like I've been trying to make this clear, but I think that's why the legal framework has to follow the moral one and not vice versa, because the moral case, it totally makes sense to say someone getting good time credits or someone, having the ability to possibly exit early should not be dependent upon their forced labor, right? That is a coercive thing. I can go home sooner if I engage in this thing that I want to go engage in. But there's no legal framework that says that offering up good time credits in lieu of actual payment that makes sense is illegal, for example. It is immoral, though.
No, I appreciate you affirming that. Joshua, question for you. Where do you see the strongest through line between stolen land and genocide and the machinery of confinement and coerced labor?
The strongest third line is control. Stolen land and genocide, the Native people, the Group people, the Black people, created systems designed to remove indigenous people from place, break kingships, suppress ceremony, and seize resources. Right now, we're actively combating, mineral resources from sacred sites all over the country. So it continues today through policing, prisons, probation, surveillance, coerced labor, child welfare, voting barriers, and laws that criminalize poverty, survival, and resistance. The machinery of confinement is not separate from colonial violence. It's one of modern forms. The carceral system is a continuation of colonial governance. For missions, here in California, you have the mission system, and then followed by boarding schools, and now jails, prisons, and foster care. Foster care is a huge one. These systems are designed to remove people from their families, their cultural, their lands, their way of life, their maternal systems. And this is not accidental, it's structural, right? This is a big one. Criminalization of survival must end. I know it's pretty deep. Criminalization of survival must end. Indigenous and marginalized communities are disproportionately criminalized for poverty, substance use, homelessness, and self-defense. These are outcomes of systematic harm and not individual failure. They're not individual failure. People can fix themselves and do better. The system is the ones that force us into those situations.
I appreciate you, Joshua. You are soft-spoken, but you're making the point. It is, in the end, all about control. And if I would add anything, I would say control for the point of greed and gain. This capitalist system is trifling.
It's a shame.
Let me get back to the script.
Yes.
This script says, Nicole, where do you see the clearest link between coerced labor, captivity, and the conditions that the youth that you're working with are organizing against today?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think the first thing I'll say is I'm just up here listening to everyone speak about really the unbroken string from really pre-colonial times to present around these systems of control that were built by law, right? This is, we sometimes think about, I remember when the movement for Black Lives was first starting and people were combating white supremacy and racism, right? But racism is not just a feeling that came out of nowhere for people to against other people. It was literally constructed in order to justify exploitation, labor. It's so wrong in this country, especially to disentangle questions around labor and race and democracy even, because in this country those things have always been intertwined, right? And in the moments where we have movements like the abolitionist movement, civil rights movement, those are race-conscious movements that actually made our democracy more real and created better labor conditions for everyone. And so, I don't know, sometimes I just look at the conversation, the movement right now, and efforts to kind of disentangle those things as though we've ever had a successful democracy movement in this country without taking on white supremacy. It's just actually not true. And so I'm thinking about that as we're up here. I'm thinking about the descriptions around involuntary servitude, and I'm yeah, and that sounds just like indentured servitude. It's literally the same construct, right? You are in a contract, you do something bad, then you suddenly get more time. It's a straight line, it's the same system. You look at what's happening with ICE today, same mechanisms as slave patrol. Really the exact same tactics that are being employed for control, for greed, for gain. So I'll just say that. And as far as where these systems intersect, very clearly involuntary servitude is a direct, unreckoned with like continuing part of white supremacy that wasn't actually dealt with. And we're seeing the consequences of that today. And movements, youth movements, since 2024, there have been powerful youth organizations, movements against what was initially police brutality, and but then grew into a more systemic critique around our history, white supremacy, racial capitalism, plantation capitalism, and it just is exactly the uproot start for so many of the things we're talking about here, for so many of the policies and systems we're interacting with. Young people have been playing whack-a-mole downstream with all these policies and all of these pieces that are impacting them. And that's important to do the policy work, but right now, the young people that we work with are really focused on turning their eyes upstream and be like, this is all colonial violence. This is actually all a repercussion of indigenous genocide and slavery and white supremacy, which, by the way, has been constructed, that's never been unconstructed. And that, I think, is like the silver bullet towards actually getting the shift in knowledge and policy that we need to like clear the field of so many of these issues at once. And that's really inspiring to see. And the last thing I'll say on this, and I also have to apologize because I have to run out at 3 p.m. So I might have to leave suddenly, but we've done it before, like actually, even though we are in the midst of, and we're experiencing the unchallenged consequences of slavery to this day, there have been times where movements changed the law, really use the infrastructure of this country to undo white supremacy, even if it was brief. But like, the Reconstruction Amendments, many of them right after the Civil War, that was an effort of using the federal government to actually combat, the KKK, like white supremacist militias in the South. Right now, what we see is an effort to use the federal government to recreate the Confederacy. So it's the opposite, but, understanding the systems, the policies of this country is a tool that we should actually wield to undo this violence. That's the place that I think movements really shine, because legal policy is downstream from people power. It sounds corny, but it's true. And so, that's actually a blueprint we could done before that we could look at in our nation's history, and that's what we, I think, need to do again in order to really reckon with this from its foundation. So.
I appreciate you naming that, Nicole, and as you were talking, the first thing that occurred to me when you were talking about the young folks really going upstream and taking on colonization is, at least in my experience, my observation, it was young folks that really lifted up the genocide in Gaza and called it genocide, and named the fact that this is like empire building on the part of Israel. I see you grabbing your mic. Was there something you want to say?
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting about that, and also even the current conversation around fascism in this country, sometimes people like to cite, Germany and Nazis. No. That was inspired by black codes, that was inspired by Jim Crow, that is homegrown. The systems we're seeing in Palestine being used to colonize, that happened here, obviously, right? Still very clearly with indigenous people in this country. And so knowing really the origin points of what we're seeing to be able to attack it here first is a really important part of the story.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Because I do want to respect folks' time, and also Nicole, because you mentioned that you have to part at 3 p.m. I'm going to direct my next question to Cameron. Cameron, I'm going to ask you a question, but then I'm also going to ask you to share if there are any salient words that you want to deliver to the folks here today because we may have a chance to open it up for Q&A, but just in case we don't have a chance to open it up for Q&A, Cameron. So first I'll give you the question. If you could answer the question and weave in some of your wisdom and insight related to the question, that would be great. Okay, so your question, Cameron, There's so many, and I get to choose. I really love this one. This one is asking about, this is really moving towards building coalition power and durability. And the question is, how do you build a clinic, like a pro bono pipeline that follows impacted leadership instead of substituting for it, right? Like folks like myself, how do you be a movement lawyer rather than stepping in and taking up too much space? What do the rules look like? Oh, no. Oh, no, don't talk, Karen.
Throughout this process, can you hear me okay?
Yes, can you start over?
Okay, awesome.
Thank you.
So, as I mentioned, I work within a clinic, and so I work with law students and public policy students on this, and they're really eager to get involved in projects like this that feel really fresh and feel like, they can really make a difference in moving the ball forward. And so I think also because, folks that are still learning and still kind of getting their wits about them are in a good position to work on projects like this, because it gives them an opportunity to really get their feet wet, to really work directly with community, and to be led by the community initiatives as they kind of develop their own understanding of how to utilize the law. I just mentioned, I'm here at a conference, and I was really excited to chat about some of the work that I've been doing in reparations, and one of the tools that we've been using in moving this forward is just kind of a simple diagram that helps us to think about the different opportunities that are available to us to move forward reparative justice projects. It's kind of a 3x3 grid. I wish I could share screen and show it, but if you kind of think of like a tic-tac-toe board, and you're thinking about the 3 levels of government, federal, state, local, and then you think of generally the 3 branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. You can kind of think of each of those different cells as kind of a domain or a place where you can move forward advocacy. And so what I've been doing with my students, and what my students have been doing along with our clients, is really trying to map out those opportunities that we have to build multi-pronged, multifaceted campaigns. So again, at the state level in California, we have things like ACA 7 that's being looked at right now to try to create a little bit more room to move forward programs that support race conscious in that way, right? You see local efforts, San Francisco, moving forward with their Human Rights Commission and some of their reparative justice projects. And so, can I share? I might see if I can, I don't know if I can pull it up quickly. Here. I'm just going to show really quickly a slide from my slide presentation, actually. Let's see, share. Can you see this by chance?
Yes.
Yeah, right. And so, so this is kind of what I was mentioning. This is actually part of the presentation I just did here at this conference. But this is an example of kind of how you're thinking about the different levels and branches of government and how to move forward reparative justice claims there, right? This is looking specifically at some of the harms that we've seen. So for example, at the federal legislative level, we have HR 40 that's been moved forward many times. There hasn't been a lot of action on that. Across the judicial branch, there's been efforts to really foreclose opportunities for reparations using equal protection, which was initially created to be able to support these kinds of actions to address racial disparities, are now being utilized to prevent racial justice practices and projects from moving forward. Political question doctrine, again, this idea that the courts say they can't produce results, they can't remedy these harms, it has to be something that is dealt with through the legislature. And what I was just mentioning in terms of an advocacy matrix, or ways to identify new ways to move forward our campaigns affirmatively, you can think through these opportunities and where your organizations can plug in and how you can build coalition across local and state level campaigns. And so again, at the state level, seeing the state legislature move forward in completing a reparations report to examine these harms. Again, ACA 7 is being looked at right now. These are things at the state level, but then also things at the local level. I'm in the Bay Area. There are efforts that the Berkeley mayor is moving forward, the San Francisco mayor is moving forward. Alameda County Reparations Task Force has been doing really exceptional work. They're looking at producing a report in June, right? And so again, being able to connect the dots across these projects, I think, is what's really critical, and work working with law clinics and students, I think, is a good way to be able to get the capacity that you need to be able to move those projects forward and to kind of operationalize what these harms are, right? Lawrence talks so much about these harms and kind of trying to put words and feelings to what has been experienced. And I think the next stage of that is taking those experiences and being able to make them fit the legal kind of frameworks and hurdles that have been created deliberately to make it hard for us to get relief.
We definitely appreciate you sharing that. There's nothing like a solid visual, Cameron, so thank you for that. I am going to extend an opportunity first to, what time I got? 7 minutes. Well, I'm actually looking at you, Joshua. I'm not gonna ask you a question. Instead, I'm gonna make some space. Is there a message? Is there a call to action? Is there a request that you wanna make in this room today?
Yeah, so, I was talking about, indigenous genocide earlier that happened in the state of California. The suppression and control. We've been working on a bill, AB 1881, is California Indian Freedom Act. And boy, it's making a lot of people upset because, they don't want to see us having, the right to go in a park and pick medicines and practice our traditional teachings. And, we tell them like this, this is our land. Yeah, you should have heard Ramos in there. He was like, well, these are our lands. This is stuff we've been doing from time immemorial. What seems to be the problem? So, I have letters of support that can go out, and that'd be awesome if we can get support on that. Because it is 1881. It's the California Indian Freedom Act. And it's a real important piece of legislation that's going through. I remember when I was taking Native Studies at UC Davis, I remember we talked about it all the time. Having the freedom, religious freedom. And the 1978 the Religious Freedom Act, we call it the Bear with No Teeth. So it's kind of like one of those federal, laws that there's a good start, but really nobody understands jurisdiction, and when you get to state level, they don't recognize it. Well, we're state, we got our own fishing game and this and that, so yeah, it really helps to establish those, clear lines.
Thank you, and that just speaks to what you were saying about being in solidarity and showing up for one another. Nicole, any parting words you wanna share before you gotta get out of here in 4 minutes?
Yeah, thank you for making time to fit me in. A few things. I mean, just to build off of what Brandon said in his presentation, but this year, as the 250th anniversary of the country, of the Declaration of Independence is happening, there actually is a really big opportunity to insert our need to reckon with our past and the ongoing legacies of slavery and genocide in that moment. We at Get Free are doing nationwide mobilizations. Our chapter here in California is going to be doing a mobilization, and part of that is to push back against, how many of you know about all the attacks against museums to rewrite history that's happening by the Trump administration? Yeah, so there's a reason why they're trying to not let us know history, because they don't want us to fix how it's currently impacting us now. And there is something that actually is an opportunity in how nakedly they're doing that in the Trump administration, because it's very unpopular. And so we have a really big chance to push back against what they're doing and also make a case for reparations, for repair, especially as we look back at where we've come from the past 250 years. So plug into that, and that's one place that I think we can really change the narrative.
Thank you, Nicole, and we will not hold it against you if you have to peace out. But I do want to give Lawrence an opportunity if there are any parting words that you want to share in less than 2 minutes.
Y'all think I can do less than 2 minutes?
Yeah, we got it.
What? Y'all lying. Y'all don't believe that. I can, but just be simple. If there's anything that I believe in, I would want to impart is that unity is absolutely a must, and fragmented solidarity is the stupidest thing on earth. Y'all gonna keep hearing me say that. It really is. I mean, it makes no sense to fight against each other, to fight for the same things. But I really want to encourage y'all to plug in with our ABC Freedom and Repair Coalition, because we want to make sure that we not only recognize the harm that happens when we don't plug in, but recognize the power when we can all plug in and bring our whole communities with us, utilizing every facet of what we all do best. And I really want to challenge Cameron, as well as Brandon, to coalesce and push me, and to push each other to make sure that we continue, no matter what the legal field and sphere looks like, to utilize it to fight. When it looks like we can't, go to the drawing board and what's the strategy to do so. And be interested in plugging into those pipelines, and seeing how we can move our collegiate environments and break ground. Was that less than 2 minutes?
Great job.
See, I need some more.
And we're gonna have Brandon, our keynote, close us out, and you also have about 2 minutes.
Oh, just to interrupt, if y'all don't already have the barcode in here, please scan that and fill that out.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I closed my keynote statements by saying that there's never been a year that the country existed that people weren't advocating, organizing, and fighting. You know, I sit up here as the descendant of people who survived, right? Survived the Middle Passage, survived slavery, survived Reconstruction, survived the first backlash and the second backlash and the third backlash. And it's my intention that my descendants will be sitting somewhere else as survivors as well. And what that requires is meeting the moment and tapping into the resilience that already predated me and will be here after me. You know, the legacy is one of innovation. At every single point when things looked the darkest after Reconstruction, or during Reconstruction, there was more Black folks elected in a shorter amount of time than had ever been elected ever before, and then they shut that down. And then folks figured out a way to get around that. When there were poll taxes and literacy tests and all those other things, folks figured out a way to get around that. When it looked like it was impossible to get the Civil Rights Act passed, folks got it passed. And so, you know, as I said, I'm not typically a person that leans into hope as some sort of like esoteric pie in the sky kind of thing. For me, it's very much grounded in reality. So the reason that I am hopeful and remain so is because my people have been fighting forever.
I want to thank Cameron and Nicole and Joshua and Lawrence and Brandon and myself and each of you for staying with us. We told you that it would go until 3 p.m. It is 3 p.m. It has gone. If there is someone who has a pressing question, when these folks get off the stage, they are going to be here for you. Thank you so very much. Another successful Quest for Democracy.
You talked about it this morning? Mm-hmm. What did he say? Isn't that dope?
I was thinking about you.
Do you want the others in the?
Who me?
I said, I'm so crazy. I should have got that call.
Right.
I was like, dude, I'm trying to